Bonjour, hi, Canada. Hugh Hewitt in the Relief Factor studio up north, joined by Noah C. Rothman. That's where you'll find him on X at National Review, the editor's podcast, all over the place. Frequently seen on many news stations, and one of my favorite guests. Noah, you are a victim of the guest who went before you. All right, Dr. Oren, ambassador from Israel to the United States for many, many years, paratrooper, serious man, says Israel's got to go into Lebanon, and that it is possible, not likely, but possible that Hezbollah's missiles could strike, maybe even sink, the USS Lincoln. Iran certainly could. Not likely, possible. If that happened, what would be the response of the United States?
I would hope the United States would respond with overwhelming force, not just against Hezbollah targets, but Iranian targets, military targets, both inside the country and outside the country. We should not make some sort of cosmetic distinction between Hezbollah and their sponsors in Tehran. Hezbollah doesn't move without Tehran's say so. And if they were to take that kind of offensive action, again, directly against the United States, we would be at war with Iran.
Thank you. We agree. I like it when I agree with Noah because sometimes we disagree and that's okay, but I like when we agree. Number two, I read his story at the break. I cannot believe he did this. I respect Admiral Kirby. I have met him once. He is a patriot. He is a vet. Yesterday, he sent an email to his staff, which unfortunately for him, he included reply all, the most dangerous thing in the world, and it went to Fox News, in which he said there's no use in responding to the handful of veterans who are talking about Afghanistan because they're just a handful of vets, and indeed they are, quote, all of one stripe, close quote. Should he resign?
That's a tough question. I didn't serve. I cannot speak to how non-coms talk about enlisted men who are of lower rank. Maybe that's how they talk about them. But it's certainly unprofessional, certainly disrespectful. And should he resign his post is a question, I think, for his superiors and perhaps for himself. But certainly, if I was his superior, I'd put him on the back burner for a while. This is a comms guy. He's a public face of the State Department, and he can no longer serve.
No, National Security Council.
National
He
Security
did
Council.
that National Security Council. All right,
Yeah,
Noah. I don't know what we.
I don't know.
I'm not going to talk about. I know what you think about Trump and Harris in the debate. I listened. What I do not know is what you think about isolated ABC News's performance, and specifically the failure to ask one question about China and whether or not you think Disney, which has two theme parks and a lot invested in China, is behind that vacuum on Tuesday night.
Well, that's a good question, and it's sort of a broad question, right? I mean, we're not just talking about Disney in that sense. We're talking about all networks and all sponsors and all the conglomerates that have investments in them and the fiduciary responsibility those networks therefore have to their investors. And can they operate as neutral media arbiters of our domestic political discourse? I mean, that applies universally at this point. So it's a far broader problem with significant implications. If you were to come to the conclusion that I think you reach, and perhaps I reach. I can't say one way or the other. I do not want to defend ABC News' moderators because they do not deserve defending. But you can tell they tried to cram in an entire general election into entire debate. And that's not normally how these things work, right? Especially when it comes to foreign policy. Traditionally, we have a debate dedicated to foreign policy questions because the world is a very big place and there's a lot of issues and it's very hard to cram them all into one thing. That being said, the omission of China as a significant foreign policy issue. I mean, the thing is, Iran barely even came up and came up via proxy when we're talking about Israel and Hamas. But it was Harris who brought up Iran precisely twice, and Donald Trump who talked about how they were bankrupted under his administration. But the fact that we have several active combat zones where the United States is under fire in off the coast of Yemen, in Syria and Iraq, and off the coast of the Levant, where we're deterring Hezbollah, that should have been a very central focus, and it was not. China's omission is, again,
three soldiers were killed in Jordan. Three soldiers were killed in Jordan by Iraqi
naval
militias
assets have
run
not
by.
seen this kind of combat since World War II. Active duty.
But Kamala Harris said that's not true. Kamala Harris said we have no one in harm's way.
And that is as bad a mistake as Joe Biden made when he said that nobody had died in combat in his administration. A profound insult, not just to the soldiers who passed when they were killed in that Jordanian outpost, but 13 Americans who died at Abbey Gate. But you could attribute that to a brain fart, right? You can't. What do you attribute this to? This is just an administration talking point that simply sails over everybody's heads, I suppose. And we're not
You know,
talking about soldiers who are on deployment in operations that happen to be hot. These are live combat zones dedicated to active missions, which have names and everything. So there really is very little excuse.
last question on the debate. Not one question Wednesday night. And I'm probably most shocked about this. It's what I led my new Fox News column with. China's bad, Iran's bad, everything we just talked about is bad, but this is shocking. Not one question Wednesday night about the execution of Hirsch Goldberg Paulin and the other 5 hostages 2 weeks ago. I do not understand. I've done 5 of these debates. You rehearse 12 times. The question teams is between 30 and 50 people. The head of ABC News was involved, probably the head of Disney, probably the head of the network. It's highly scripted. Everybody knows what they're going to ask. It's all laid out. Everybody knows what order it goes in. I've done it 5 times. They made a choice, Noah, not to mention Hirsch Goldberg Pollen. And I am outraged. Are you?
Yeah, you should be. An American soldier had a gun put to, or American citizen had a gun put to the back of his head by a terrorist organization sponsored by Iran and pulled the trigger. Americans should be furious, not just because of the abstract principle that Americans should be inviolable abroad or they face the wrath of the United States. You yourself, if you find yourself in trouble abroad, expect to be abandoned by this administration or expect to have your case handled and maybe achieve liberation if you happen to be in the custody of, say, Moscow, by releasing assets that are of vital national interest to Russia in exchange for your freedom. I think ABC News should have probably the most egregious failure of ABC's moderators was when they asked Kamala Harris about the ceasefire question, which was poorly framed because they said, "Look, there's no deal to be had because Netanyahu doesn't want a deal." That's not true. Hamas has rejected 5 of the last 5 ceasefire proposals, not Benjamin Netanyahu. But they pressed Kamala Harris on the ceasefire. Listen, how do you get a ceasefire if there's no deal to be done? And she says, well, we need a ceasefire. That's her answer, which is not an answer. It's an insult to our intelligence and no follow up. Listen, I had
Jake
frustrations
Tapper
with fact
noted
checking too.
when Jake Tapper is telling people she punted, she didn't answer any questions, then she didn't answer any questions. Let me
But
close
follow
this
up
way,
if
Noah, because
she doesn't answer a question.
yeah,
They did it a couple
let
times
me
with
close
Trump,
here.
and they had no follow up.
I don't know if you'll agree with this, but I did my monologue this morning. Upon further review, the officials in the booth have reversed the call on the field. On Tuesday night, I thought Trump had lost the battle, but maybe won the war because they were talking about migration and the economy a little bit. Upon further review, after yesterday and seeing what I thought was 95% outrage with ABC, I think Trump's numbers may go up by 7 days from now when the debate is fully baked in. What do you think?
I don't know. I would be kind of surprised. The polling has been tightening recently, and it's not because Harris is doing worse, it's because Trump is doing better. He is reclaiming some of those voters who maybe had a dalliance with being undecided, or possibly even looking at Harris's record. But media bias is something that you and I, and people who pay very close attention to the press and the political cycle at a granular level, notice. The voters who matter in this election are not those kind of voters. I would be surprised if they registered what we understand to be the media putting their fingers on the scale, and much less resent it. So possibly, but it would surprise me.
All right, now I can squeeze this in. David Yost, the Attorney General of Ohio, yesterday posted there's a recorded police call from a witness who saw immigrants capturing geese for food in Springfield. Citizens testified to the city council. These people would be competent witnesses in court. Why does the media, he's talking about ABC, I talked to the city manager,
Right.
find a carefully worded city hall press release better evidence? Did you know about Springfield? 20,000 Haitians on a city of 58,000 people. I didn't even know about it until Tuesday night.
No, I didn't. I didn't know that. Well, I certainly didn't know. I didn't know the scale of it. Certainly, if Donald Trump had said in that moment, and by the way, the cats and the dogs line is the moment of the night, which is why it was a mistake. But if he had said geese, he would have been on very firm ground. The thing about it is, nobody cares about geese. Geese are mean. They attack your children. They taste horrible. Nobody's going to have any sympathy for slaughtered geese. So he had no
And it
choice
would have
but
been better to
geese.
say 20,000 people in a city of 58,000. That's what you have done, Kamala. But, of course, if wishes were... Noah C. Rothman, great for you to appear. Thank you. I appreciate it. Everyone go listen to the Editor's Podcast. Noah's usually on there, sometimes interviewing Andy McCarthy on the McCarthy Report as well. Thank you, Noah. Stay tuned.